Welcome to Tomversations, a monthly conversation with me, your host, Tom Hollingsworth, the networking nerd, on a variety of enterprise IT topics that I find interesting or want to take a closer look at. We're up to episode 15 now, and we're going to be talking about security today. Specifically, we're going to be talking about hacking and its role in policy. Now, I'm going to get a little political here. So if that's not your thing, you probably want to go ahead and skip to another episode. I will be bringing up some countries as we go along. Speaking of which, hacking. It's a thing, right? Ever since the seminal 1995 work starring Johnny Lee Miller and Angelina Jolie, hacking has been part of the common pop culture vernacular. We use hacking to describe any one of a number of things that we do on a daily basis, such as finding ways to use 2 liter soda bottles to do common household things. But in reality, when we talk about hacking in the terms of enterprise IT and security, what we mean is people gaining access to systems that they should not be gaining access to. Now, maybe it's something simple for most common folk, like defacing a website to prove that you're elite, or maybe even trying to get a hold of the next characters that are going to be released in Super Smash Brothers. But as we move up the ladder and we start becoming more and more ingrained into what hacking is capable of doing, we realize that the targets, as they get bigger, are usually motivated by different reasons. Historically, it's been money. People want to get paid. If you look at the recent spate of malware and ransomware infections, it's all about getting as much Bitcoin as you can and cashing that in to buy boats and yachts and hopefully get out of jail free card when you get caught. However, there is a much bigger hacking group that is trying to use the tools available to them to create policy and affect political change. And that would be nation state hacking. It's a term that's grown quite a bit over the last decade because it's not just single hackers working on their own kind of outside the system now. Ironically enough, um, looking back at hackers with the hack the planet methodology and the people trying to bring down big business, there are a lot of attackers now that are essentially tools of their government, which is about as anti-hacking, anti-establishment, pro-establishment as you can get. Now, why would you do this? Well, there's a number of reasons. Most of the time that we look at historical nation state hacking, it's for intelligence gathering purposes. When you look at the intelligence apparatuses of governments all over the world, they just use cyber espionage as another tool in the arsenal, along with human intelligence and signals intelligence and good old fashioned spy work like you'd see in James Bond. I mean, that's essentially the reason why the NSA was created. You also do it for disruption. And if you look across a lot of the hacking that's happened in the last 10 years, it's had a disruptive element to it. Look back at the 2015 Ukrainian blackout, which has been attributed to Russian hacking groups, or perhaps even one of the most famous disruptive hacks of all time, Stuxnet, which was carried out on Iranian nuclear reactors by supposedly US and Israeli assets. It could be for good old fashioned money. If you look at an episode of Darknet Diaries, Jack Rhysider talks about the North Koreans, which is a country that is under heavy sanction by most of the world, trying to go out and purloin money from banks all over the world for hard currency assets. The Bangladesh bank heist is one of my favorite of all time, just because of the sheer audacity that it took to actually get some of that money and how big it could have been if they'd have been able to pull it off. And then sometimes you do it for revenge. Look back at the North Korean hack of Sony Pictures and the leaking of a significant amount of data by those hackers, as well as the South Korean Olympics hack, another story covered on Darknet Diaries, that was eventually attributed to the Russian hacking organizations that essentially were trying to get revenge for some of the issues that happened due to their Olympic bans and some negative press from their hosting of the Olympic Games. So there's a lot of reasons to do it. But why would you have somebody do it for you? I mean, we have all of these intelligence assets just sitting around in places like Fort Meade and St. Petersburg. Why not have them do it? Why contract it out to these lone hacking groups? Well, part of it is the same reason that while James Bond may be an asset of the British government, if he gets caught, or if Ethan Hunt is caught during his Impossible Mission Force missions, he will be disavowed and burned in the parlance. He never existed. He didn't do this for us. It's easier to hire a subcontractor to do these things for you so that you can disavow complete responsibility for it should there be blowback, should there be news coverage of it. And for a single hacker or possibly even a group of hackers, it's kind of advantageous to have someone watching out for you, especially if they let you kind of go off and do what you want. Run some malware operations, get some juicy data on a potential corporate target to sell back to them. And as long as you answer the phone when your benefactor calls and says, hey, we need you to hack Microsoft or the Pentagon, you can get away with just about anything. I mentioned Stuxnet as an example of a disruptive cyber attack. And according to most people, it's considered to be one of the very first cyber weapons. It was a very targeted attack that required the involvement of a nation state to provide specific information that was used to effect the hack. The equipment that was targeted was sold in secret. The development of the weapon has been attributed to multiple sources working in tandem of Western governments acting against a non-friendly government in Iran. In fact, Mikko Hyppinen, who is a famed security researcher, was asked back in 2011 if this was a nation-state attack, and his coy response was, well, if there was such a thing, this would definitely check all of the boxes. And in the last 10 years, we've come to see that a lot of organizations are working with nation states, both for protection and access to resources. Probably the most famous today is the Internet Research Agency, which is an arm of Russian intelligence services that is used to carry out a number of attacks across a wide variety of potential targets, whether they be opposition political parties inside of Russia, outside of Russia, or just targets designed to create and sow chaos. It's a longer term play than simple ransomware. We go back to thinking about things like WannaCry, or even going all the way back to Conficker. These were disruptive, sure, but they were disruptive with a purpose. WannaCry specifically wanted ransom to unlock your systems. And while that can provide a bit of income for a potential hacking group or even a nation state that is expecting a little bit of kickback, it's not always a reliable resource. What happens if someone is able to release a decryption tool? Or what happens if the target just refuses to pay? What if the target is unable to pay due to sanctions, as we've seen recently in the United States, where the US Department of Treasury will not allow you to pay hacking groups which are under embargo or under a show cause order, which is actually most of the hacking groups that are operating with nation state support, such as Lazarus or any one of the various bear groups that are operating out of Russia. So it's a long-term play. When you look at things like the recent SolarWinds hack, which has widely been attributed to Russian assets, the goal was not to get paid. The goal was to get in and get things that would allow you to build bigger, better, badder malware in the future. And we're only 3 months removed from the disclosure of the SolarWinds intrusion, although we're realistically at the time of this recording about a year out from the actual penetration itself. And we're starting to see a significant amount of ancillary crime that is leveraging information and assets that were gathered in those hacks. I mean, we go all the way back to 2013 when Edward Snowden released a significant amount of information about the cyber warfare capabilities of the United States, specifically of the NSA. And after some releases of tools, a lot of those tools formed the next generation of malware that was used against private citizens. In fact, the referenced WannaCry was one of those tools. So what does this mean in the long run? What are we looking at? Well, we always knew that cyber warfare was something that countries were going to have to get involved in. And if you check out the Wikipedia page for cyber warfare, you can see an exhaustive list of countries that are participants in this. You can easily find the top ones: China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, Israel, the USA, Um, but there are more than that. You can see Pakistan and India carrying out cyber warfare operations against each other. Saudi Arabia engaged in their own cyber war against some of their neighbors. Even countries that you would not expect to have this kind of capability or to use it, like Egypt. But the fact is that the new battlefields are being fought in cyberspace instead of in the sand or in the dirt, because it's much easier to carry out these operations on a much smaller scale using much more protected assets, and it doesn't cost as much money or loss of life. Although there are reports now that some traditional military assets are being used to target cyber warfare operations to disrupt them the old fashioned way with explosives. So that's something that we'll have to consider as we move into the future. It's also something that we need to be aware of because it can be used as an excuse to get out of bad security practices. I find anymore as I listen to news podcasts such as Risky Business or Smashing Security, which are constantly updating us on recent hacks and movements by known hacking groups with nation state backing, that it's quick to try to attribute these hacks to nation states. Um, Generally, within the first 24 to 48 hours, before we even have any information or forensics details, it's generally anything bigger than just stealing passwords is attributed to the Chinese or the Russians or the North Koreans. And I feel like a lot of companies do that specifically because they want to get out of saying, well, if a nation state puts all of its resources on trying to get into our systems, there's really not much that we can do about it. Yeah, and maybe not making all of your passwords the name of your company with 123 on the end would have been a better security solution to start with. So, yeah, if a determined attacker wants to get into your house, all they have to do is kick in the front door and take whatever they want. But if you leave the front door unlocked and wide open, it doesn't matter whether or not the attacker is a rogue person working for themselves or someone with nation state backing. You still shouldn't have left your door open. Maybe nation state hacking is a blessing in disguise because it will force companies to build their protections to withstand assaults from coordinated groups working with intelligence assets behind the scenes. I'm not saying that the Russians or the North Koreans or the Chinese are necessarily going to make everybody's security better. What I'm saying is that if you think that you are the kind of organization that's only going to get hassled by the occasional script kiddie or the occasional person who downloads a super secret tool and manages to invade your systems and encrypt a few 100 gigabytes worth of files, you should be building for the kinds of people that are going to slip in secretly, persist for months, and then exfiltrate as much data as possible against you and your partners. If you build it bigger than you need it, if you build it better than you need it, then you don't have to worry about someone bigger or better or badder walking along and kicking in your front door. I don't know where we're going to end up when it comes to nation state hacking. We're still kind of in the nascent intelligence gathering, revenge, disruption phase, but there's still some targets that have been heretofore untouched. There was a recent spate of ransomware that was encrypting hospital IT systems. And that got the attention of a lot of people in the news really quickly because this is not just infecting a shipping line or a GPS company. This is infecting organizations that literally life hangs in the balance. In fact, there have been some attributed deaths to these hacking attempts. We also have not seen anything that would hack, power grids or hydroelectric dams or so-called hard targets that could cause a significant amount of damage. As we move on to nation state hacking, one of the biggest concerns involves cyber warfare and some norms and rules that most countries follow with regard to cyber warfare. Things like the Geneva Conventions. We typically do not target medical facilities or other kinds of targets that could potentially lead to loss of civilian life. Now, we have seen many things pop up in the news recently, some of them involving hospitals that have come under cyber attack with ransomware and things of that nature. And unfortunately, there have been fatalities that have been attributed to these kinds of attacks. But what happens when the gloves come off and in a full scale war, these kinds of norms are not followed? What if a hydroelectric dam is brought offline and causes massive structural damage for one reason or another? What happens if the next attempt to hack a nuclear facility to slow production of certain kinds of materials leads not to a shutdown of the reactor, but instead an event similar to that of, say, Chernobyl? We really don't want to have that kind of escalation in nation state hacking because, as we've seen over the years, these kinds of attacks beget responses, and those responses cause more responses. And before you know it, you've escalated to the point where, much like any other conventional conflict, you start a war you may not have intended because you didn't know when to stop what you were doing. I don't have a solution to nation state hacking right now. And I don't think any one person does. I think we collectively, as the people, have to decide where to draw the lines and where to stop the madness before it becomes as routine as something in another seminal movie, Johnny Mnemonic, where the net is just simply a wasteland of vigilantes that are trying to steal as much information as they can about you and either sell it for a profit or give it to a nation state to enact in some kind of nefarious plan. And if that all sounds very science fiction-y, remember that the science fiction of the 90s is the reality of today. Well, that will just about do it for this episode of Tomversations. I want to thank you for tuning in. I know sometimes these topics can get a little bit heady, but these are the news items that we see on a daily basis. Like I referenced, Risky Business and Smashing Security podcasts. Every episode has some kind of mention of a new crew that could potentially be working for a nation state. So you definitely want to check those out, as well as Darknet Diaries. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into some of the things that are going on, I'll make sure to link to those in the show notes. I also want to mention that we have a security event that will be coming up very soon during the recording of this video. Security Field Day 5. It's part of Tech Field Day, the job that I do during the day, where we'll be talking about all kinds of enterprise security, including how to prevent things like nation state hackers. So if you want to make sure to check that out, we will include a link to it as well. Please make sure you check out our website at gestaltit.com for more great stories and more great media, including our podcasts, our Checksum series, and great articles written by not only myself and Stephen Foskett, but the rest of our influencer community. There's a lot of great information there that you don't want to miss out on. Please make sure you tune in next month for another episode of Tomversations, where we will be discussing more great topics. See you soon.